I told my son I have 3 children, and he was never one of them. Dad, I need $50,000. Liam stood in my driveway like he owned it, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. He didn't ask, didn't say hello, didn't acknowledge that he hadn't returned my calls in 3 years. Just walked up to my front door at 8 on a Saturday morning and stated his demand like I was an ATM he'd forgotten the PIN to. I stared at him, my coffee mug frozen halfway to my mouth. Behind me, through the screen door, I could hear Natalie laughing at something on TV, her 9-year-old giggle bright and unself-conscious. The twins were still asleep upstairs. My wife Rebecca was making pancakes in the kitchen. It was supposed to be a normal weekend morning. Then my 25-year-old son appeared after years of silence, and normal shattered like glass. "You look good," I said finally, because I didn't know what else to say. He did look good, healthy, expensive, nothing like the angry 18-year-old who'd screamed that I wasn't his real father and walked out of my life without looking back. Liam's jaw tightened. "I don't have time for small talk. I need the money by Monday. It's important." "Important how?" I set my coffee down on the porch railing, buying myself time to think. My hands wanted to shake, but I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "Is someone hurt? Are you in trouble?" "I'm starting a business venture with my real father. We need capital. He's putting in half. I'm responsible for the other half." The way he said real father was deliberate, a knife sliding between my ribs with surgical precision. "I figured you owe me at least this much, for lying to me my entire childhood." The screen door creaked open, and Rebecca appeared, still holding a spatula. She looked at Liam, then at me, reading the situation instantly. "Natalie, sweetie, can you go wake your brothers? Tell them breakfast is almost ready." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were fierce. She'd never met Liam, had only heard the stories. Now here he was, and she was already stepping between us like a shield. Natalie's footsteps thundered up the stairs. Rebecca crossed her arms, waiting. Liam glanced at her with obvious dismissal, then focused back on me. "We can talk inside if you're worried about the neighbors hearing family business." "We're not going inside." I kept my voice level. "You haven't been family for 7 years. You don't get to show up and pretend those years didn't happen just because you need something." His face flushed. "I was a kid. I was angry. You lied about being my father. You let me believe you were my biological dad when the whole time." "I didn't lie." The words came out harder than I intended. "I was your father. I raised you from the day you were born. I changed your diapers, taught you to ride a bike, sat through every parent-teacher conference. Your mother and I never discussed biology because it didn't matter. You were my son. That was the truth. Until the DNA test proved otherwise." Liam pulled his phone from his pocket, checking the time like this conversation was boring him. "Look, I don't want to rehash ancient history. I need the money. You can either help me or not, but you spent 18 years playing dad, so yeah, I think you owe me something for that performance." Rebecca made a small sound in her throat, somewhere between a gasp and a growl. I touched her arm gently, a silent request to let me handle this. She nodded once and went back inside, but I knew she was listening from just beyond the door, protecting our kids from whatever explosion might come next. I looked at Liam, really looked at him, and tried to find some trace of the little boy who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work, the kid who'd cry if I missed his soccer games, the teenager who'd ask my advice about girls and college applications and whether he should try out for the school play. That person was gone. Standing in his place was a stranger wearing my son's face, and the recognition of that loss hit me harder than his demands for money. "No," I said quietly, "I'm not giving you $50,000, or $50, or anything at all." His expression darkened. "You're seriously going to be petty about this? After everything? After everything?" I felt something crack open inside my chest, years of swallowed hurt suddenly demanding air. "You found out about your biological father and erased me like I never existed. You wouldn't take my calls. You skipped my wedding. You never met your siblings. You sent back every birthday card unopened. And now you show up asking for money like I'm some guilty ex-husband who needs to pay you off? You're not my father. The DNA test proved it. Richard Ashford is my father. He's rich, successful, actually worth knowing. You're just some guy who got cuckolded by my mom and was too stupid to figure it out." He said it casually, like commenting on the weather. "So, yeah, I think you owe me for wasting 18 years of my life pretending to be something you weren't." The screen door slammed open and Rebecca stormed out, spatula still in hand like a weapon. "Get off our property, now!" Liam laughed. "Who's this? The replacement wife? Did you tell her about my mom? About how you drove her away with your mediocre life and boring? Your mother had an affair." My voice cut through his words like ice. "She slept with her boss while we were married. She got pregnant. She chose not to tell either of us the truth. Those are facts. What's also a fact is that I loved you anyway. I stayed. I raised you. And when she died when you were 12, I grieved for her, while still being your father every single day." Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe. Or memory. But it vanished as quickly as it came. "Richard said you'd play the victim card. He warned me you'd try to guilt me. Richard Ashford." I tasted the name, bitter and familiar. "Your biological father who knew about you for 7 years and never once tried to meet you until you showed up with that DNA test. The man who has 3 other kids he barely sees. The one who's currently on his fourth marriage. That's the father you chose. He's successful. He owns half the commercial real estate downtown. He's taking me into his business, teaching me things you never could. Liam straightened his expensive tie. He said you'd be jealous, that you'd try to sabotage our relationship because you can't stand seeing me succeed. Rebecca laughed, sharp and humorless. Succeed at what? Begging for money? Your real father is so successful he's making you come here and grovel to the man you rejected? That's his business lesson? Liam's face went red. This is an investment opportunity. Richard is testing whether I can raise capital independently. It's about proving myself worthy of. It's about him using you. I suddenly felt exhausted, the weight of this conversation crushing my chest. He's making you come here because it amuses him. He knows it'll hurt me. He knows it'll hurt you. And he doesn't care because to Richard Ashford, people are just assets to be leveraged. You don't know him. I know his reputation. Everyone in this city knows Richard Ashford, the man who destroyed 3 family businesses buying up their debt during the recession, the developer who displaced 200 low-income families to build luxury condos. Your biological father is famous, Liam, just not for anything good. Liam's hands clenched into fists. He's giving me opportunities you never could. A real future, not this suburban nothing life you settled for. Then why are you here? The question hung between us, simple and devastating. If Richard Ashford is so generous, so wealthy, so perfect, why isn't he funding your business venture himself? Why does his son need to beg his not-real father for money? The silence stretched long enough that I heard birds singing in the neighbor's tree. A car drove past. Normal Saturday morning sounds that felt surreal against the wreckage of this conversation. Because he wants me to learn how business works. Liam's voice had lost some of its edge. How to negotiate. How to leverage relationships for profit. He wants you to hurt me. I said it gently, without anger. He's known about you since you were 18. He could have reached out any time before that DNA test result. He chose to wait until you came to him. He chose to turn you against me. And now he's sending you here to ask for money he could easily give you himself. Because this isn't about business, Liam. It's about power. About proving he can take everything from me, even my son. Liam's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and I saw his expression shift. Whatever the message said, it changed something. When he looked back at me, there was something uglier in his eyes. Desperation wearing a mask of contempt. Richard said you'd try to poison me against him. He said you'd make him sound like a villain because you're threatened by a real man. His voice rose, angry now. You were never enough, Dad. Not for Mom, not for me. You're a middle management engineer who drives a 10-year-old car and lives in a house that probably costs less than Richard's monthly wine budget. You're mediocre. And I'm not going to be mediocre just because you are. Rebecca grabbed my arm, her grip tight. I could feel her trembling, whether from rage or the effort of staying quiet I couldn't tell. Behind us, I heard small footsteps in the house. The twins, probably wondering why breakfast was taking so long. I thought about them overhearing this, learning that their half-brother they'd never met thought so little of the father they loved. You need to leave. My voice came out steadier than I felt. You're not getting money from me. Not today, not ever. What you're getting is one last piece of advice, whether you want it or not. Richard Ashford doesn't love you. He loves what you represent. A way to hurt me, to prove his superiority, to have another possession he can show off. And the second you stop being useful, he'll discard you exactly like he's discarded everyone else in his life. You're wrong. But Liam's voice wavered. He's my father. He wants to help me succeed. Then let him write the check himself. I stepped back toward my door, toward my family, toward the life I'd built after Liam destroyed the first one. Goodbye, Liam. I hope you figure out what you're really worth someday, but you're not going to figure it out here. He stood there for a long moment, phone in hand, expensive suit slightly rumpled now. I saw him as a little boy again, just for a second. 5 years old, crying because he'd fallen off his bike. I'd picked him up, brushed off his knees, told him he was brave enough to try again. He'd believed me then, trusted me completely. That trust felt like a ghost haunting the space between us. Richard was right about you. Liam's voice went cold. You're bitter and small, and you'll die bitter and small in this pathetic little house, with your replacement family who'll probably figure out how disappointing you are eventually too. He walked away before I could respond, climbing into a BMW I hadn't noticed before, too focused on his face to see the car. He drove off fast, tires squealing slightly on the turn. Rebecca pulled me inside and wrapped her arms around me, and I realized I was shaking. Daddy? Natalie stood at the bottom of the stairs, her face worried. Who was that man? Nobody important, sweetheart. Rebecca answered before I could, her voice perfectly calm. Just someone Daddy used to know. Come on, let's get you kids those pancakes before they get cold. The twins thundered down behind their sister, 8-year-old boys with boundless energy and no awareness that anything was wrong. Rebecca herded them into the kitchen, shooting me a look that said we'd talk later. I nodded and followed, but my hands still shook as I poured more coffee. I'd met Liam's biological father exactly once, 15 years ago, under circumstances that still made my stomach hurt to remember. Richard Ashford had shown up at Liam's 7th birthday party, uninvited and unexpected. Carolyn, my wife at the time, had gone white when she saw him. I didn't understand why until later that night when the screaming started, when the truth came out in fragments and accusations, when my marriage imploded and my understanding of my son's existence fractured into something jagged and sharp. The affair had lasted 6 months, when Liam was 2 years old. Carolyn swore she'd ended it, swore she'd chosen our family, swore Richard meant nothing. She hadn't known she was pregnant until after they'd stopped seeing each other, had convinced herself the timing meant Liam was mine, had needed him to be mine because the alternative was unbearable, and I'd believed her because I'd loved her, because Liam had my eyes, or so I thought, because the story we told ourselves was easier than the truth. Richard had known, had always known, had kept that knowledge like a weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it. The birthday party appearance was theater, a warning shot. He didn't want custody or a relationship. He wanted to watch us squirm, to remind Carolyn of what she'd done, to establish his power over our lives. Then he'd left, and we'd tried to pretend it never happened. Carolyn died 3 years later in a car accident, sudden and senseless and devastating. Liam had been 12, angry at the world, drowning in grief. I'd held him through the funeral, through the sleepless nights, through his rage at a universe that took his mother. We'd survived that loss together, or I thought we had. Built a new version of family, just the two of us, father and son against the world. The DNA test happened on his 18th birthday. He'd ordered it online using money from his graduation gifts. Said he wanted to know his heritage for a college essay. I didn't think anything of it until he got the results, and the earth shifted beneath my feet. Not father and son, not biologically related at all. The test was absolute, unquestionable, devastating. Liam had stared at the results for hours, not speaking. Then he'd pulled out his phone and started searching for Richard Ashford. Found him immediately because Richard was famous in our city. Wealthy, connected, everything I wasn't. The next morning, Liam called Richard's office. They met for lunch, and something in my son cracked open that day. Something that swallowed the 18 years we'd built together and replaced them with resentment and contempt. The transformation wasn't immediate. It was gradual, insidious. Liam started mentioning Richard casually, how impressive his office was, how many employees he had, how he'd offered to help with college tuition. I'd tried to be understanding, tried to give Liam space to process his complicated feelings about having two fathers, but understanding wasn't what he wanted. He wanted me to disappear, to stop existing so he could fully embrace Richard's world without the guilt of abandoning me. By the time Liam left for college that fall, he'd already emotionally moved out. He came home for Thanksgiving but spent the entire weekend on his phone, texting Richard. Christmas break he stayed with Richard instead. Said the man had a ski lodge in Aspen, and why would he want to spend the holidays in our boring house when he could be skiing? I'd sent him gifts anyway. They came back unopened. Spring semester he changed his emergency contact from me to Richard. Updated his social media to say Richard Ashford was his father, no mention of me at all. Started using Richard's last name informally, though legally, he was still Liam Cooper. When I called his dorm, his roommate would say he wasn't there. When I drove to campus, he wouldn't answer his door. I left notes, sent emails, tried everything except what he actually wanted, which was for me to vanish. The final conversation happened in May of his freshman year. I'd shown up at his dorm unannounced, determined to have it out. We'd gone to a coffee shop near campus and sat across from each other like strangers meeting for a failed blind date. He'd told me plainly that Richard was his real father now, that I needed to accept that and move on, that he was changing his last name legally as soon as the paperwork processed, that I shouldn't contact him anymore because it was confusing and upsetting. I'd asked what about the 18 years we'd spent together? What about all the moments that mattered before biology entered the equation? He'd shrugged and said those years felt fake now, like he'd been living a lie. Richard was authentic. I was a mistake that needed correcting. He'd finished his coffee and left me sitting there, and that was the last real conversation we had until this morning when he showed up demanding money. 7 years of silence. 7 years of wondering if he was okay, if he'd graduated, if he was happy. 7 years of checking his social media from fake accounts because he'd blocked me on everything. 7 years of seeing photos of him with Richard at charity galas and golf tournaments and business conferences, always smiling, always polished, always a million miles from the boy I'd raised. And then I'd met Rebecca 3 years ago at a friend's wedding. She was recently widowed with 3 kids, and a smile that made something in my chest remember how to feel things besides grief. We'd talked for hours at the reception, then exchanged numbers, then started dating with the cautious hope of people who'd both been devastated by loss. Her husband had died from cancer, leaving her with Natalie and the twins when the kids were barely old enough to remember him. She understood complicated family dynamics, understood that love didn't always follow biological lines. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony in her backyard. Her kids had called me dad within the first year of dating, easily and naturally, like it was obvious that's what I was. I'd tried not to compare them to Liam, tried not to measure their affection against his rejection, but the contrast was impossible to ignore. These children who shared no DNA with me chose me as their father. The child I'd raised from birth had chosen someone else. Now Liam stood in my driveway 7 years later like no time had passed at all, demanding money for a business venture with the man who'd systematically destroyed everything we'd been, and I'd said no, because I finally understood something crucial. Liam hadn't rejected me because I wasn't his biological father. He'd rejected me because Richard Ashford's life looked shinier, because wealth and status mattered more than 18 years of love, because he'd confused real fatherhood with the performance of success. The twins were arguing about syrup distribution when Rebecca came back into the living room, where I stood holding my cold coffee and staring at nothing. She took the mug from my hands and set it down, then cupped my face between her palms. "You did the right thing." Her voice was steady. Giving him money would have just taught him that manipulation works. I raised him better than this. The words came out broken. He used to be kind. He used to care about people. What happened to that kid? Richard Ashford happened. And adolescence. And grief about his mom that probably never got fully processed. Rebecca kissed my forehead. But mostly Richard Ashford, turning your son into a weapon to hurt you with. It's working. I know. She pulled me into a hug. But you're not alone in this. You have us. 3 kids who love you more than anything. A wife who's going to make you eat pancakes even though you have no appetite. And maybe someday Liam will figure out what he lost. Maybe he won't. But either way, you can't let his choices destroy the life you've built. I held her and listened to our kids laughing in the kitchen and tried to believe her. The problem was that Liam's arrival had reopened something I'd thought was scarred over. The knowledge that the child I'd loved most in the world had looked at me and seen nothing worth keeping. That biology had mattered more than memory. That Richard's money had outweighed my devotion. The rest of that Saturday passed in a blur of forced normalcy. We took the kids to the park, made dinner together, watched a movie. The whole time I felt like I was performing being okay, hitting all the right notes while something inside me bled. Rebecca saw through it but didn't push, just stayed close and made sure I was never alone with my thoughts for too long. Sunday morning, I got the first text. Unknown number. Dad said you refused to help. Not surprised. You were always selfish. It didn't take detective skills to know Liam had changed his number and was reaching out to twist the knife deeper. I deleted it without responding. The second text came an hour later. Richard says I should take you to court for 18 years of emotional fraud. He's willing to fund the lawsuit. Third text before noon. You owe me for pretending to be my father. Richard calculated what you would have paid in child support if you'd been honest from the start. It's about $200,000. Lawyer will be in touch. I showed Rebecca the texts. She took my phone and blocked the number, then handed it back. He's desperate. Richard is probably standing over his shoulder telling him what to write. Don't engage. But the texts kept coming from new numbers. Each one more aggressive, more bitter, more clearly scripted by someone who enjoyed causing pain. By Monday morning, I had 17 blocked numbers and a headache that felt like it was splitting my skull. I called my lawyer, an older woman named Patricia, who'd handled my will and Rebecca's adoption of paperwork for her kids after their father died. Patricia listened to the whole story without interrupting, then asked me to forward all the texts. She read through them in silence, her expression getting progressively more severe. Finally, she looked up at me across her desk and shook her head. This is harassment. Legally groundless harassment. No court is going to award damages for raising a child you believed was yours. She made notes on a legal pad. But I'll send a cease and desist letter to both Liam and Richard Ashford. That should stop the texts. If it doesn't, we can pursue a restraining order. I don't want to get a restraining order against my son. The words tasted wrong in my mouth. He's not acting like your son. He's acting like Richard Ashford's attack dog. Patricia's voice softened. I know this is painful, but you need to protect yourself and your family. This man is threatening legal action over something that isn't actionable. That's not grief or confusion. That's calculated intimidation. She drafted the letter while I waited, then printed 2 copies and had them sent via courier for signature confirmation. I drove home feeling like I'd just declared war on my own child. Rebecca met me at the door and pulled me inside without a word, and I realized I'd been crying somewhere between Patricia's office and home without noticing. The texts stopped after the cease and desist arrived. Radio silence for 3 days that felt more ominous than the harassment. I kept checking my phone, expecting something worse. A lawsuit. A public smear campaign. Richard Ashford was vindictive and creative and had infinite resources. The quiet felt like a held breath before a scream. On Thursday evening, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. A woman's voice, professional and cool. Is this David Cooper? Yes. I'm calling from Mercy General Hospital. You're listed as emergency contact for Liam Ashford. He's been admitted following a suicide attempt. The world tilted. What? When? Is he? He's stable. He overdosed on sleeping pills but was found quickly. He's asking to see you. The woman's voice carried no judgment, just clinical information. Visiting hours are until 9 tonight if you'd like to come. I looked at Rebecca, who'd gone pale reading my face. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The hospital was downtown, 40 minutes away with traffic. Rebecca drove while I sat in the passenger seat trying to process what stable actually meant, trying to understand how we'd gone from harassment texts to suicide attempt in less than a week, trying not to think about Liam at 12 years old, sobbing in my arms after Carolyn's funeral, begging me not to leave him too. Rebecca parked in the visitor lot and grabbed my hand before I could get out. Whatever happens in there, remember he's not your little boy anymore. He's a grown man who's made choices. You can love him and still protect yourself. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed it. Some part of me would always see him as the kid who needed me, no matter how much evidence accumulated to the contrary. I walked into that hospital ready to forgive everything, and I hated myself for it. Liam's room was on the 4th floor, psychiatric observation unit. A nurse checked my ID and led me to a room with reinforced windows and furniture bolted to the floor. He was sitting up in bed, hospital gown making him look younger and more vulnerable. His wrists had bandages, IV line in his arm. When he saw me, something crumbled in his expression. "Dad," his voice cracked. "You came." "Of course I came." I stood at the foot of his bed, not sure whether to hug him or keep my distance. "What happened?" "Everything fell apart." He stared at his hands. "The business deal collapsed. Richard said it was my fault for not securing the full capital. He said I'd embarrassed him, that maybe I wasn't cut out for his world after all." Tears started sliding down his face. "He hasn't answered my calls in 3 days. His secretary says he's unavailable indefinitely. I think he's done with me." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Richard had set Liam up to fail, sent him to me for money knowing I'd refuse, then used that refusal as proof that Liam wasn't worthy of the Ashford name. It was cruel and methodical, and exactly what I'd expected from a man who treated people like chess pieces. "So you tried to kill yourself?" I said it flatly, trying to keep the anger out of my voice. Angry at Richard. Angry at Liam for letting himself be used. Angry at myself for not protecting him from this somehow. I didn't know what else to do. His voice was small. "I burned every bridge getting close to Richard. I ruined my relationship with you. I dropped out of grad school because Richard said formal education was for people without connections. I quit my job because he promised me better, and now I have nothing. Nobody. I couldn't face starting over from zero. You didn't have nothing, you had me." The words came out harder than I intended. "I would have helped you, would have let you move home, helped you find work, supported you through rebuilding your life, but you had to try to destroy me first." He flinched. "Richard wrote those texts. He said you'd feel guilty enough to pay if I made it seem legal. I just wanted to make him happy, to prove I was worth keeping around. By attacking the man who raised you, I felt 7 years of hurt rising in my throat like bile. By threatening lawsuits and calling me mediocre and telling me I owed you for 18 years of love. I know." He was fully crying now. "I know I fucked up. I fucked up everything, but I didn't know what else to do. Richard said he'd disown me if I didn't try, and I couldn't lose him too. He's my real father. He's a sperm donor who enjoyed watching you suffer." I moved closer to the bed, my voice dropping. "Liam, I need you to hear this. Richard Ashford doesn't love you. He never loved you. You were a toy he played with until he got bored. That's not fatherhood. That's narcissism with a trust fund. But he's successful. He's important. He could have given me opportunities. He gave you nothing except contempt and manipulation." I sat down in the chair next to his bed, suddenly exhausted. "You know what real fathers do? They show up. They stay. They don't make their kids jump through hoops to earn basic affection. They definitely don't send their kids to extort money from the man who actually raised them." Liam stared at the ceiling, tears still streaming. "I ruined everything with you. I know that. I can't take back the things I said. Can't undo the years I ignored you. I don't even know why you're here. Because when the hospital called, my first thought was that I couldn't lose you." The admission hurt to say out loud. "Not again. I already lost you 7 years ago when you chose Richard. Losing you permanently would kill something in me I'm not sure I'd survive. I'm sorry." He said it so quietly, I almost didn't hear. "I'm so fucking sorry for all of it." We sat in silence for a long time. The hospital sounds filtered in through the closed door. Someone crying in another room, nurses talking at their station, a TV playing somewhere distant. Normal sounds in a place designed for people who'd stopped being able to handle normal. "Richard sent me to you as a test." Liam's voice was flat now, emotionless. "He wanted to see if I'd actually do it, if I'd hurt you for him. When I came back and told him you refused, he laughed, said I'd failed at the simplest negotiation, that I was too emotional for business. Then he told me the deal was dead, and I should probably figure out my life without his help." "That was 4 days ago?" "Yeah. I spent 2 days calling everyone I knew trying to piece together the money myself. Nobody would help me. All the people I thought were friends were just Richard's associates being polite. When I realized how alone I was, how completely I'd isolated myself," he gestured at his bandaged wrists, "it seemed like the only way to make it stop hurting. It's not the only way." I reached out and touched his hand carefully, like he might shatter. "It's the permanent solution to temporary problems. That's what I told you when you were 15 and had your first breakup. Remember?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You made me watch that stupid movie about the guy who sees what life would be like if he'd never been born. It's a wonderful life, not stupid. Classic." I felt something in my chest unclenching slightly. "You cried during the ending and pretended you had allergies." I did have allergies, but he was almost smiling now, and the expression looked painful on his face, like he'd forgotten how. "You made hot chocolate after and we talked about how everyone's life matters to someone. Your life matters to me." I squeezed his hand. "It always has, even when you hated me, even when you told me I was mediocre and boring and not your real father. You've always been my son, Liam. That hasn't changed." He started crying again, harder this time. "I don't deserve that. I don't deserve your forgiveness after everything." "Probably not." I said it gently. But love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing someone and keeping that choice even when they make it hard. I chose you 25 years ago when you were born. I'm still choosing you now. A nurse came in to check his vitals, giving us a moment of respite from the intensity. When she left, Liam seemed calmer, more grounded. He asked about my life, actually interested for the first time in years. I told him about Rebecca and the kids, about my promotion at work, about the house we'd bought. He listened without the contempt I'd expected, just sad acceptance that he'd missed all of it. Do you think they'd ever want to meet me? He asked it hesitantly. Your other kids? Do they know about me? They know I had a son who I lost touch with. They don't know the details. I chose my words carefully. And yes, someday, if you're healthy and stable, I think they'd like to meet their brother. But that's not happening tomorrow. You need to focus on getting better first. Richard told me they were replacements, that you'd erased me and built a new family to forget I existed. His voice was bitter. I believed him. You believed a lot of things Richard told you. That's going to take time to unpack. I stood up, knowing I couldn't stay much longer. Rebecca was in the waiting room and the kids needed dinner. But when you get out of here, we can figure out the next steps. Therapy, maybe a halfway house while you rebuild. I'll help you, but I'm not rescuing you. You're going to have to do the work. He nodded, looking exhausted. I understand. And Liam? I paused at the door. Don't contact Richard Ashford again. Ever. Block his numbers. Block his email. Erase him from your life completely. He's poison, and you need to detox. Okay. He said it so quietly, I barely heard. Okay. I found Rebecca in the waiting room and collapsed into the chair next to her. She didn't ask questions, just took my hand and let me breathe. We drove home in silence, both processing what the hospital visit meant. Liam was alive, but broken. Sorry, but maybe not enough. And I was back in the exhausting position of being his father, with all the complexity that entailed. The next 3 months were brutal. Liam spent 2 weeks in psychiatric care, then moved into a transitional living facility for people recovering from suicide attempts. I visited twice a week, bringing books and takeout food, sitting with him while he worked through therapy exercises. Rebecca came once, assessing him with the sharp eye of a mother protecting her cubs. She wasn't warm, but she was civil, which was more than I'd expected. Liam started calling me regularly. Not every day, but often enough that I started to believe he was serious about rebuilding. He got a job at a coffee shop near his facility. Nothing glamorous, minimum wage and early mornings, but honest work. He sent me photos of latte art he'd made, proud of small accomplishments in a way he'd never been about Richard's business deals. We talked about Carolyn eventually, about the affair and the lies, and how they'd shaped his entire existence. He cried about missing her, about how he'd blamed me for her death in ways he'd never articulated, about how Richard had encouraged that blame, had used it to drive a wedge between us. The conversations were painful, but necessary, excavating wounds that had festered for years. In month 4, Liam asked if he could come for dinner. Rebecca agreed reluctantly, making me promise we'd set clear boundaries. The kids were nervous, having heard bits and pieces about their mysterious older brother. I was terrified it would be a disaster that set back all the fragile progress. Liam showed up on time wearing clean jeans and a button-down shirt, carrying flowers for Rebecca and a board game for the kids. He looked healthy, clear-eyed, like someone who'd survived drowning and was still surprised to be breathing. Rebecca accepted the flowers with cautious politeness and showed him inside. Dinner was awkward at first. The twins stared at Liam like he was an alien. Natalie asked blunt questions about where he'd been and why he was just meeting them now. Liam answered honestly, age-appropriate but not condescending. He told them he'd made mistakes and hurt people he loved, and he was trying to be better now. The simplicity of it seemed to satisfy them. After dinner, we played the board game he'd brought. Liam was patient with the twins' constant rule-breaking and cheered when Natalie won. Rebecca watched him carefully the entire time, still protective, but I saw her expression soften when he helped clean up without being asked. When he left, he hugged me at the door and said thank you for giving him another chance. I told him he still had a long way to go before he'd fully earned it, but I was proud of the progress he'd made. 6 months after the suicide attempt, Liam moved into his own apartment. Small studio in a decent neighborhood, furnished with second-hand furniture and good intentions. He'd been promoted to shift supervisor at the coffee shop and was taking night classes at community college. Not the glamorous life Richard had promised, but genuine and earned. I helped him move, along with the twins who treated it like an adventure. We hung pictures and assembled furniture and ordered pizza, and for a few hours, it felt almost normal. The text came on a random Tuesday evening while I was helping Natalie with homework. Unknown number, but I recognized the pattern. I hope you're satisfied with yourself. You've reduced my son to working retail and living in poverty. This is your fault. Richard Ashford, reaching out after months of silence to remind me he was still watching. I showed the text to Rebecca. She read it and laughed. He's pathetic. Block him and move on. But I didn't block him. Instead, I replied, your son is alive, happy, learning who he is without your manipulation. I'd say that's the opposite of poverty. The response came quickly. He's wasting his potential. He could have been someone important. He's someone's brother now, someone's future uncle, someone's son again. That makes him more important than your entire real estate empire. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The next text was longer. You won. Congratulations. You got your son back by making him so pathetic that he had nowhere else to go. That's not love. That's desperation wearing a mask. I thought about not responding, but something in me needed Richard to hear this. I didn't win. He did. He survived you. That takes more strength than anything you've ever done. And yes, he's my son again. But not because I forced it, because he chose it, because he figured out that biology doesn't make family, choice does. You'll never understand that because you've never chosen anyone in your life. You just buy them and break them and throw them away. The typing bubbles appeared and disappeared several times. Finally, he'll come back to me. They always do. Not this time. I blocked the number and put my phone down, and felt lighter than I had in years. Liam came to Christmas that year. He'd been sober for 9 months, employed for 7, and in therapy the entire time. He brought presents for everyone, thoughtful things that showed he'd been paying attention. A book series Natalie mentioned once, building sets for the twins, a nice bottle of wine for Rebecca and me. We opened gifts in the living room while snow fell outside, and the kids argued about whose turn it was to choose a movie, and Liam looked at me with tears in his eyes. Thank you for not giving up on me. He said it quietly while the kids were distracted. I know I didn't deserve it. Nobody deserves unconditional love. That's what makes it unconditional. I handed him a gift, a framed photo of him at 5 years old, laughing on my shoulders at the zoo. I kept this in my office the entire time you were gone, even when you hated me, even when I thought I'd lost you forever, because you were still my son. He held the frame like it was made of glass, staring at the photo. I remember that day. You bought me elephant ears and I got powdered sugar everywhere. You threw up on the car ride home, because you let me eat 3 of them. He was smiling now. You were a terrible influence. The worst. I smiled back. Still am. Ask Rebecca. The evening dissolved into the comfortable chaos of family. Kids running around hyped up on sugar. Rebecca organizing leftovers. Liam helping the twins build their new toys, while Natalie read on the couch. At one point, Rebecca came and stood next to me, watching Liam play with her sons, and squeezed my hand. He's trying. She said it like an observation, not praise. I see him trying. He is. He's good with them. She nodded toward where Liam was making the twins laugh with silly voices for their action figures. Natural with kids. He always was. I remembered him as a teenager, volunteering at the community center with elementary school kids, before Richard, before everything broke. I think he gets that from his mother. Carolyn was good with people. He gets it from you too. Rebecca kissed my cheek. Whether you share DNA or not. The night ended with everyone exhausted and happy. Liam hugged each of the kids goodbye, promising to come to Natalie's school play next month. He hugged Rebecca, who stiffened slightly but patted his back. Then he turned to me, and for a moment, we were just father and son again, uncomplicated by history or biology or the wreckage of the past 7 years. I love you, Dad. He said it simply. I should have said it more. I'm saying it now. I love you too. I hugged him hard. Drive safe. Text when you get home. I will. He pulled back, smiling. Same safety protocol as when I was 16. Some things don't change. I watched him drive away in his used sedan, so different from the BMW he'd arrived in that morning months ago. Rebecca stood beside me on the porch, our kids already upstairs getting ready for bed. The snow was falling heavier now, covering everything in white. You think he'll be okay? Rebecca asked. I think he's figuring it out. I pulled her close. One day at a time. We went inside and locked the door against the cold. Upstairs, I could hear the twins arguing about whose turn it was to use the bathroom first. Natalie was singing something off-key in her room. Normal sounds of a normal evening in a normal house. The life I'd built after everything fell apart. 2 years passed. Liam finished his associate degree and transferred to a 4-year university studying social work. He wanted to help kids from broken families, he said. Give them the support he'd needed when Carolyn died. When Richard had come into his life like a bomb. The work was hard but fulfilling, and I watched him grow into someone thoughtful and intentional. Someone who'd been broken and chosen to rebuild himself into something better. He dated occasionally but nothing serious. Focused on school and work and therapy and rebuilding relationships with people he'd hurt during the Richard years. He sent apology letters to friends he'd ghosted. Made amends to the aunt and uncle who'd tried to stay in touch when he'd blocked them out. Slowly, carefully, he stitched together a life that felt authentic instead of performed. The twins started calling him their big brother, easily and naturally. Natalie was more reserved, but warmed up gradually, bonding with him over their shared love of fantasy books. Rebecca relaxed around him, seeing that his changes weren't manipulation, but genuine growth. By the 3rd year, he was fully integrated into our family in a way that felt miraculous, given where we'd started. The knock on my door came on an ordinary Saturday morning when I was grading papers at the kitchen table. Rebecca answered and came back looking confused. Someone named Richard Ashford is here to see you. Should I tell him to leave? I felt my stomach drop. What does he want? He didn't say, just asked if you had a moment. She watched my face carefully. I can tell him to fuck off if you want. I considered it, but curiosity won. I'll talk to him. Stay close in case he tries something. Richard Ashford stood on my porch looking older than I remembered. Still expensive clothes, still that aura of controlled power, but something had shifted. He looked tired, maybe even sad, though that could have been my imagination projecting humanity onto a man who'd proven himself incapable of it. David, he nodded at me. Thank you for seeing me. You have 5 minutes. I crossed my arms. What do you want? I wanted to apologize. He said it stiffly, like the words hurt coming out. For what I did to Liam, for using him to hurt you. It was cruel and unnecessary, and I've spent the last 3 years regretting it. I stared at him, trying to find the angle, the manipulation hidden in the apology. What brought on this sudden conscience? My daughter. He looked down. She's 15. Smart. Angry at me for all the marriages, all the time I didn't spend with her. She found out about Liam somehow and asked me why I'd abandoned my son. I told her I hadn't, that he'd chosen to leave. She showed me his social media, all the photos of him with your family, smiling, healthy, and she asked me if I'd ever made him that happy. And? I couldn't answer. Richard's voice cracked slightly. I realized I'd taken a young man who was grieving and vulnerable and turned him into a weapon, used him to prove some point about my superiority over you, then discarded him when he stopped being useful. My daughter called me a monster. She's not wrong. I let the silence stretch. Richard shifted uncomfortably, unused to spaces where his words didn't fill every gap. Finally, I spoke. You're not here for forgiveness. You're here because your daughter is ashamed of you, and you're trying to fix your image. Maybe. He met my eyes. But that doesn't make the apology false. I hurt both of you. Badly. On purpose. And I need to own that. You almost killed him. The words came out cold. Your games put him in a psychiatric hospital. He could have died because you wanted to prove you were more important than me. I know. Richard's composure cracked. I know what I did. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking if I can write to Liam, to apologize to him directly, to tell him that what happened wasn't his fault. No, I said it firmly. He's rebuilding his life without you. You don't get to come back now and unsettle that progress because you suddenly feel guilty. I'm his biological father. Doesn't that? It means nothing. I cut him off. You share genetics. That's it. Fatherhood is showing up, staying, choosing your kid every day even when it's hard. You did none of that. You treated him like property. You don't get access to him now just because you finally developed a conscience. Richard looked like I'd slapped him. I just want to make amends. Make amends by leaving him alone forever. That's the only thing you can give him that has any value. I stepped back toward my door. Your 5 minutes are up. Don't come back here. Don't contact Liam. Move on with your life and let him move on with his. Does he ever ask about me? The question stopped me. I considered lying, but the truth seemed more powerful. No, he doesn't. You're a chapter he's closed. He's got too much good in his life now to waste energy thinking about you. Something in Richard's face collapsed. He nodded slowly and turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, you're a better father than I'll ever be. Liam was lucky to have you. He is lucky to have me, I corrected. Present tense, because I'm still here and I always will be. Richard walked to his car without looking back. I watched him drive away and felt nothing. No vindication, no satisfaction. Just a dull awareness that he'd remain broken in ways money couldn't fix. His daughter would probably figure that out too eventually. I went inside and found Rebecca waiting. What did he want? Absolution he doesn't deserve. I pulled her close. Don't tell Liam he came by. He doesn't need to know. She nodded against my chest. Your kids are arguing about whose turn it is to set the table. You should probably go mediate before they start a war. My kids. I smiled at how naturally she said it. All 5 of them. All 5. She kissed me. Go be a dad. I went into the dining room where the twins were engaged in a heated debate about fairness and turn-taking. Natalie was reading at the table, ignoring them completely. Liam was due for dinner in an hour, bringing his new girlfriend we hadn't met yet. Just another Saturday evening. Just family doing what families do. And somewhere in the city, Richard Ashford was driving away from the life he'd destroyed and the son he'd never really known. I didn't pray often, but I hoped his daughter would be okay. Hoped she'd find better father figures than him. Hoped she'd understand that biology didn't bind you to broken people if you were brave enough to walk away. The door opened, and Liam walked in early, girlfriend at his side. She was pretty with kind eyes and a nervous smile. Liam introduced her as Amanda, and she shook everyone's hands while the twins immediately started asking inappropriate questions about whether she liked video games. Rebecca rescued her while Liam pulled me aside. Thank you for this. He gestured at the house, the family, the noise and chaos of Saturday dinner prep, for letting me be part of it again. You were always part of it. I meant it. Even when you weren't here, you were always my son. He hugged me quickly and joined Amanda in the kitchen where Rebecca was putting her to work chopping vegetables. The twins were setting the table now, still arguing but doing the task. Natalie had abandoned her book to quiz Amanda about her job. Normal family chaos before dinner. I stood in the doorway and watched my children, biological, adopted, and reclaimed, filling my house with noise and life and love. Thought about the boy born 27 years ago who I'd held in a hospital room while whispering promises about protection and love. About the man who'd shown up demanding money I wouldn't give. About the son who'd survived and rebuilt and chosen me again. Rebecca caught my eye and smiled, asked without words if I was okay. I nodded and joined the chaos, helping the twins finish the table while Liam told some story that made Amanda laugh. This was fatherhood. This messy, complicated, sometimes devastating, always worth it love that didn't care about DNA. That survived rejection and rebuilt after devastation. That kept choosing and choosing and choosing until the person you loved finally chose you back. When we sat down to eat, Liam reached for my hand during grace. A small gesture, familiar. The same way he'd held my hand when he was 5 and scared of the dark. His grip was stronger now, steadier, but the trust was the same. I squeezed back and said a silent thank you to whatever forces had brought us back to this moment. Then I opened my eyes and looked at my 5 children and my wife, and the full table and the life I'd built, and knew with absolute certainty that I'd meant what I said that morning when Liam showed up demanding money. I had 3 children, and through grief and growth and choice, Liam had become one of them again. But not because of biology, because of love. Because that's what real family actually means.